Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Zog Science. Today we're going to be talking about populations and kind of the different factors that affect their growth and different ways that we can describe them. So why do we want to study populations, right? Well, let's do a little review first. Okay, populations, remember those are the members of a species that live in the same ecosystem or the same area at any particular time. And the reason why we want to study populations is because they give us a better idea of the interdependence among living things rather than just studying an individual. So if we study the whole population, we can get a better idea of how it is interacting with the other populations in its area, and also how different factors can affect the size of the population. So what are some characteristics of populations? Well, first of all, we've got population density, which is just the number of individuals per unit of area. A lot of times they're going to talk about the number of people per square mile or the number of people per square kilometer. This is a map of the world, and you can see that it shows population density. The darker red and then the pink are the most dense areas, so you can see that China, India are two of the most densely populated places in the world, closely followed by Europe, and then there's kind of scattered areas. One of the things you kind of notice is that most of the most populous areas are along the coastlines, right? Kind of interesting. Most people live near the water, and that's because the coastline offers a lot of benefits, right? You can have a lot of access to trade routes. This is especially true before planes, right? Everything was shipped across the world. But also there's just a lot of food available for you and easy transport. We've also got geographic distribution, basically just where are they located. And then finally growth rate, which describes how fast the size of the population changes. So how quickly is it going up or going down. So population growth, there are four kind of basic things that determine the growth of a population. There's two kind of really simple ones, which are natality, which is birth rate, which is the number of individuals that are being born, and then mortality, or the death rate, which is the number of individuals that die every year. And if natality is greater than mortality, then the population is going to increase, and if natality is less than mortality, then the population is going to decrease. Most countries in the world exhibit a positive population growth based on natality and mortality. However, some countries like Japan are experiencing a negative population growth. They actually are struggling to get people to want to have children. Then we've also got immigration, which is the movement of individuals into an area, so people moving from one area to another. So way to think about immigration is that so they're moving into the area. And then we've got emigration, right? So they are exiting the area, they are leaving the area. And so what we want to do is we want to look at all four of those factors to figure out whether or not a population is truly increasing or truly decreasing. So we've got kind of two main growth trends that we're going to take a look at. The first one is exponential, and that's when a population size continually increases without limitation. It's just an exponential graph. So the population size would be doubling, or maybe tripling every so often, and so we get a nice J-shaped curve. That's a key component of an exponential growth, that we see a J-shaped curve where it is trending up and up and up. And generally, we don't really see populations that demonstrate this type of growth, simply because most of the time there is not ideal conditions, right? You have to have enough resources. You have to have enough space in order for this type of growth to occur. A good example of this is like bacteria in a petri dish. So we give the bacteria all the nutrients that they need, and there's plenty of space, and so the bacteria are able to grow continuously. The other type of growth that we're going to see, and this is the one that we see happen most often in the wild, is logistic growth. And this occurs when a population's growth slows or stops following a limited period of exponential growth. And so what we have here is an S-shaped curve. That's the shape that we have right here, an S shape. And what's going to happen is that we do experience exponential growth, but then that growth is going to level off, okay? And most populations, again, demonstrate this type of growth. And the reason why is because we have this idea of carrying capacity. It's the maximum number of individuals that a given environment can support. And basically, The reasons why are that there are a limited number of resources available for organisms, right? There's a limited amount of food. There's a limited amount of mates. There's a limited amount of habitat to live in, okay? There's predators. There's disease. There's lots of things that are going to limit the numbers of the population, okay? And the carrying capacity for this species, it looks like, is a little bit over 40,000, okay? So the carrying capacity would be right around here. And most of the time, in reality, this line right here is not completely straight, okay? So there's kind of like a fluctuation that occurs around this space, right around the carrying capacity. It might go over it for a little while, it might come under it for a little while, but the average kind of trend that would occur, that would be where the carrying capacity is. So there are very few natural populations that have that unlimited growth. We talked about that, okay? The reason why is that we have these ideas called limiting factors, and that's a factor that causes a population growth to decrease or to hinder it in order to kind of slow it down. For example, food and space availability, competition between members of your own species, between different species. You can have the harsh seasonal changes that keep you down, natural disasters, weather, and limiting factors determine the carrying capacity size for a given area. So how much of your particular species can live in that area is all dependent upon all the limiting factors. We talked at the beginning of this kind of unit about nutrient cycles, right? We talked about the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycles, phosphorus cycle, water cycle. There's also sulfur cycle, right? So those nutrients are huge limiting factors, especially for plants. So plants, they need nitrogen to help them grow. If they don't have enough of it, they're not going to grow enough. So that's why you have fertilizers. Fertilizers give plants all the nutrients that they need so that it's no longer a limiting factor. Okay. And these limiting factors, they can be either density dependent or independent. So let's talk about some of those. So what does that mean, density dependent? It means that it's dependent upon the size of a population, and so we call that density dependent, right? There's a large population in an area. These factors are going to affect that competition, okay? So you've got a lot of individuals. They all are going to be competing for the same food resources, again, the same mates, the same places to sleep, all that kind of stuff, okay? Predation, okay? If there are more individuals in an area, it's going to be much easier for predators to be able to catch them. If there are less, it's going to be harder for the predators to catch them. So we would call that density dependent. Parasitism, okay? Again, if there's more groups or disease kind of go together. If there's more individuals, it's much easier for disease to be passed along. Okay, think about how often you get sick in the summer, right? Not particularly often, but in the winter time and during the school year, you probably get sick more often. Okay, and that's partially because of the fact that you are being around thousands, over 1,000 students every single day. So we are in a much more closely packed environment, right? It's much easier for diseases to be transmitted around during that time. Okay, and then we've got our density independent factors. Okay, these things do not have a relationship on a population size, but still can affect the growth of a population. Okay, the weather, right? It doesn't matter how many individuals there are. The weather is going to happen how it's going to happen. Same thing with natural disasters, right? Seasons, okay? And then human activities, right? We don't care how many deer there are in a particular area or how much of an endangered species there is or whatnot. Our activities just kind of happen on their own, and they're going to affect the populations regardless of how many there actually are. Okay? So this is a graph showing the human population, okay? It's projected a little bit into the future, kind of based on trends that we see occurring. And you can see that this is an exponential growth. Okay, humans exhibit exponential growth. That's because we've really taken away a lot of our limiting factors. A lot of people kind of peg the carrying capacity for the Earth in terms of humans at around 11 billion, somewhere between 9 and 11 billion, depending on who you talk to. Some people think that we could fit as many as like 15 billion, but the thing is that in order for us to fit 15 billion people on the planet, we all have to live like like poor people would live in India or China or Africa, right? So we wouldn't be able to have all the things that we have. I wouldn't be able to have this laptop to be able to show you, to be able to make this video. We wouldn't have the internet, right? So a lot of those things, right? Those are limiting factors. Okay, we can only have so many resources. There's actually a huge shortage of precious metals that are used in manufacturing processes in the next 50 years or so. That there's going to be a lot of conflict over. But if you take a look at this graph, okay, you notice that it's kind of, there are some ups and downs, little dips here and there. And then we've got a huge dip right here. What do you think that is? That would be the Black Death, or the Black Plague, right? So diseases can have a huge effect on a population, right? It can completely wipe out large numbers of individuals and really kind of reset the genetic diversity of a population. We call this a bottleneck. So what happens is that you have a large number of people that get wiped out, and your population now, all of the genes that are in that gene pool are only going to come from those individuals, right? So you really bottleneck the population. Now for humans, right, we still had a lot of people, still had enough for a large genetic diversity, enough genetic diversity that wasn't like another disease could just come out and wipe everyone out. But in the wild, when these things happen, if you have some sort of bottleneck event, whether it be disease or some sort of natural disaster, that really shortens the population size, or makes it a lot smaller, it can leave a population vulnerable in that way. So we can also have population crashes, and this is when the size of a population drastically decreases over a short period of time. Again, this is usually due to some sort of disease event, or maybe some sort of natural disaster, or maybe you've run out of resources. So they're experiencing exponential growth, they've got all the resources that they need, and then they use up all their resources. Now their population is way too large, right? So all of a sudden there's not enough resources for all the individuals. The population crashes back down to a level where it is sustainable, and then maybe it might start to creep up again. Predators, invasive species could be added to the area. Invasive species are species that are non-native to a particular area. So they're not from there. They come in, all of a sudden they're out competing. There's a population crash amongst the native species. So how do we study populations? Okay, well, there's kind of two basic methods. One is a quadrant study. So this is when the size and diversity of a community in a small defined area is observed, and then we extrapolate that to indicate the entire population. So what might happen is that we'll mark off a certain area, and then we will have, like, let's say 1 square meter, and we're going to look at that 1 square meter, and then we know that our total area is 1 kilometer, so we would extrapolate that out to the total area. And we could do that, in a variety of different ways. We also have this idea of random sampling, or catch and release. And so what happened is that you would catch a certain number of individuals from a species, and then again you try to extrapolate that out to the entire population. So you would catch a small number, release them, and then catch them again, and then you can use some fancy statistical math to figure out what is the actual total size of the population. All right, and that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.